Hey, I'm Missy.
And I'm April.
And this is SheelaNaGig. Everybody, we're back. We're back, April. We're back.
Good to be back.
Yeah. We are here again for our weekly podcast, the SheelaNaGig podcast. And each week, of course, we explore our own SheelaNaGig. That for us is a woman whose strength and perseverance has led her to greatness, who empowers us, who inspires us. And we always say it could be somebody you've heard of, but we'd like to share a little bit more. It could be somebody you've never heard of.
But should.
And damn it, you should know. That's all I can say. Damn it, you should know. So yeah, we are delighted to be here once again to share a Sheela with you. And how are you, April? What's going on?
Oh, I'm well. I've got news.
You got news?
Yes.
Pray do tell.
Oh, well, you know what Stephen and I did last night? My husband and I.
Did you do it?
Let me say this. As the prig of this podcast, I would never confess if I did or did not.
Oh, God. Okay.
But what we did do was we booked plane tickets to go to Spain in May.
Oh my God, you're in Spain?
We're going to Spain for 2 weeks.
How nice.
I guess who we're taking?
Who?
Each
Children?
other.
The children are not going this
No
time.
children, no young adult children allowed.
I think that's good.
Well, yeah. I mean, last time we took a big trip like that, it was like a year, not this past summer, this summer before.
Yeah.
We went to Europe. We went to the UK and Paris, and we went to 2 places.
It's like your first time, right? It was a big deal.
It was our first big international trip. Other than getting my daughter in China, that was pretty significant.
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
But, and my kids fought the whole time. And while we all agree it was the best trip we ever took, and it was monumental, and all this
and then they didn't speak for a while afterward.
No, they did not speak for a good while after that.
My dad used to call us the battling brats.
The battling brats.
We'd be in the car and he'd be like, "Well, the battling brats are at it again."
Yep, exactly. And so we decided we would do a trip without the battling brats.
Yeah, no battling brats.
They're not allowed. They're not invited. We're just going, the 2 of us.
You don't have to worry about bringing a bicker barrier.
No bicker barrier.
I remember we looked that up at one point because my kids would fight so badly in the car.
Yours?
And I finally, I'm like, there must be something that you can put up between them. And I found online something called a bicker barrier.
Oh, that's hysterical. What is it?
It's this thing you put in your car between, and it creates like a little partition.
Well, you know what's funny? My kids are only 6 months apart.
Yes.
They're adopted. I'm not that talented. But we had these side-by-side strollers, and the kids would fight with each other on the stroller. And a friend of mine made a bicker barrier.
See?
We didn't call it that, but it was this plexiglass that went between them so they couldn't touch each other.
See, that's good.
Yeah.
Hands to self.
But
hands to self.
There's one thing better than a bicker barrier.
What's that?
Leaving them home. I'm going on vacation.
That's right. You don't really want to have to worry about that bicker barrier, right?
Screw that.
I think they're going to ask to go.
They already know. We let them know we were going. We let them know they weren't invited. And, Sam's going to be 21. Sarah's already 21. And they're like, cool.
They got it.
They've got their lives.
Yeah. Did you go to Spain last time or no?
No, we went to London, Paris, and then in Greece we went to Athens and Mykonos.
Nice.
Oh,
nice.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
was
I remember you loved it in the pictures, and well, good for you guys. It made it a little kind of romantic. You probably will do it in Europe.
If we do it, Missy, I won't be sharing. So don't ask. Would please? Can you, if you're going to write into...
I think I made her blush a little.
If you're going to write into the podcast, write in. Missy, don't ask April about her sex life. She's not going to talk about that on the air.
Oh my God, but it's funny. It's funny.
I'm glad you're entertained.
I'm entertained.
All right.
I have to say one little thing, too.
What?
So my daughter... At school, I remember she had these Valentines a few years ago. She was probably like 8 or 9 at the time.
Uh-huh.
And she brought home her little Valentines, and I was kind of going through each of them, and I'm like, oh, look at this one. Oh, who's this? And one of them said, Ellery, I know we fight a lot, but I just want to say I think you're a good piano player. From Noah. Oh. And I was like, oh, Noah. And then I kept kind of going through, and then I found another one that said, Ellery, I wish you'd just stop asking me so many personal questions. Thank you, Noah. And I was like, wow, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, does it? No.
Ellery is a chip off the old block.
She is.
Yeah.
I don't believe in TMI. I never have.
No, we never noticed.
No, I don't believe in TMI.
Well, okay.
I don't. Okay.
But tell us about your Sheela.
I know.
Enough about us.
I know, but I am actually incredibly excited. This has been an investment, a big investment, and a worthy investment. But I first of all, I want to give a shout out to my friend Jory. Jory is the one who turned me on to this Sheela.
Oh, okay.
Jory had kind of reached out in a text and said, I don't know if this really applies, but her story is so interesting. I don't know if you want to look into this. And so I did initially, and I was like, no, I don't think this can be a Sheela. Her story is too controversial. She's a bit of a criminal.
We talked about not doing criminals.
I know we have, but sometimes there's a fine line. There can be a fine line. People's stories are complicated. Can you be the question that keeps coming back to me is like, can you be an extraordinary person and still make really bad choices?
Well, I think we all do.
We all do, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, this is just part of being human.
Okay.
So I ask you to do a little separating here as we go, April.
All right. Well, I'm going to hold out the caveat that I will probably make an opinion, render an opinion at the end.
I know you will. So, but you'll see where I'm going.
Well,
it makes for an interesting story.
Let's hear.
And again, controversial, and you may have heard of her. You may have not heard of her. Once you hear of her, if you've not heard of her, you'll think, oh my gosh, why didn't I not know this story? Because it is pretty astounding. Mm-hmm. Her name was Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael. Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael.
I haven't heard of her.
She went by Liz Carmichael.
I was waiting for you to say Bonnie. Sorry.
No. She went by Liz Carmichael.
Uh-huh.
Have you heard of Liz Carmichael? No.
No.
Okay. You were a little bit older than me too,
Yeah.
which makes me think you may have heard of her. Like as we go on, you may have a moment of like, oh yeah.
But at the risk of selling myself out completely, I usually avoid things that would have scared me, especially when I was younger.
I don't know if she's scary.
Oh, okay.
I think she's solidly intriguing. But
okay.
And as we've talked about before, I'm going to say an arrogant genius.
Okay.
Okay. But here we go.
All right.
So what makes Liz Carmichael's story just so amazing and interesting is it has so many freaking layers. Lots of layers here. So I'm going to do my best to tell the story and kind of stay on top of the layers. I want to present her today, if I may say, from more of a feminist point of view. I want you to see her through the lens of a pioneering transgender woman. Okay. So take that into consideration as we go.
On behalf of all listeners, we gotcha.
Okay. So what makes this tricky here, as I mentioned before, her story is a crime story. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's more than one crime involved.
Okay.
There's several crimes involved.
Uh-huh.
But it's also just the inspiring story of someone who resolutely refused to be defined by anyone other than herself. It exemplifies a woman with amazing vision, perseverance, and tenacity, and I suspect her story probably would have turned out quite differently had she not been a transgender woman, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s.
Okay, I'm sufficiently intrigued.
Okay. So it's also the story of a car.
A car.
Okay. And it was a car that was supposed to be a revolutionary car. It was going to revolutionize the automotive industry, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it was never produced and it never moved under its own power. So we're going to jump in here to the tale of the very trailblazing and disgraced entrepreneur, Liz Carmichael. She was born Jerry Dean Carmichael back in 1928 in Jasonville, Indiana. Although some sources say that she was born in 1937. So that's the thing with her. There's, as we go through this, from the get-go, from day one, there's a lot of conflicting information about her.
Okay.
So was she born in 1928? Was she born in 1937? We may never know. So she described herself growing up as dirt poor and on a farm. She claims that she learned the ins and outs of engine mechanics at a very early age by repairing trucks and tractors, farm equipment. And she said, to quote, that she was so poor that she had to beg all week for 50 cents for the movies, where at the movies she would see people driving fancy cars, living in fancy buildings, and looking like they had never seen any dirt, much less have worked in it. Though it's interesting because, again, here we go, classmates remember her upbringing quite differently. They suggest that she had a very middle-class upbringing, and she lived in a rather nice house, which I've seen a picture of, and it looks pretty nice.
Looks pretty good.
Yeah. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. She transitioned at a different time, and it was taboo, obviously. And people who were trans were directed by their doctors to tell positive stories about their lives to make a false sympathetic backstory.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
This was part of
How
the
you-
culture and how you may have, you wanted to be looked at as sympathetic, as sympathetic as you can. So people would weave these stories, backstories that were not necessarily true to gain some sympathy for their situation. And being found out, of course, could mean less work, a loss of work, housing, worse, way worse,
way
right?
worse.
So we do know, though, that Carmichael had a reputation. She was very adventurous.
Do we know how old she was when she transitioned?
We'll get there.
Oh, okay.
We'll
Sorry.
get there.
All
You
right.
you are jumping ship, girl.
Well,
Okay.
I'm into the story.
She's still a little girl right now. She's still growing up poor in Indiana.
Or not.
Or not. Right? But she was adventurous. She was mischievous or mischievous, as some pronounce it. East Coaster, you say mischievous, don't you?
Mischievous.
Yeah, I say mischievous, but I think it's correct to say mischievous. She was definitely a bit of a troublemaker from the very start. And at some point, Liz moved to Detroit with her family, and there's very little information about what year that was or her childhood in Detroit. Very little information. But what I have garnered from that is that, her moving to the Motor City really sparked a love of cars in her. And early on, she had decided that she wanted to create a car, that she wanted to change the world and be the next Henry Ford. So this was something she was intrigued about cars and about the way things worked from the time she was really young. And she really was kind of this pioneering entrepreneurial spirit from the time she was very young. So, and again, I'm from Detroit,
Yes.
so I love stories about Detroit.
Of course.
Go to the Henry Ford Museum. I think I've mentioned that before. So Carmichael ended up serving in the U.S. Army overseas in Germany. And there she met and she married her first wife, Magda, and they had 2 children together. However, she, who was a he at the time, left the family and was later charged with desertion. And she had to pay a penal sum of $1,000. And
That was it?
yeah.
Oh.
And supposedly, but $1,000 during that time is probably like
Oh, yeah.
$8,000 or something.
Right.
Right.
But somehow that doesn't seem to be enough to raise 2
know.
kids. But
I know.
I digress. Keep going.
Yeah. So she also received a 1 to 3 year sentence in the Indiana Reformatory, but that sentence was suspended and the subject was released. And whether she paid that penal sum or not, I'm not really sure. There's not a lot of information about that. Okay. So then, she's back in Indiana at this point, and she married a woman named Juanita in 1954, and she had 2 more kids. Okay. Juanita estimated that they moved 21 times by the time of their split in 1956.
Whoa. Why so often?
Well, chances are she probably didn't pay that penal sum, first of all.
Oh, so she was evading the law.
Yeah.
Oh, so the crime.
And, yeah, she was a door-to-door salesman, and Michael Carmichael, as she went by then, was repeatedly arrested or fired for pocketing money through side schemes and had a habit of getting mixed up in various cons along the way.
Okay.
So this kind of kept them constantly on the run.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But then in 1959, she had kind of split with Juanita and the two kids, and Vivian Barrett met Michael, while working as a waitress. She was 16 years old at the time, and according to her brother, Charles Richard Barrett, they fell in love very quickly and married almost right away. And so at this point, Carmichael started making fake IDs and passing bad checks. From the get-go, he got Charles, Vivian's brother, involved too, and they were both eventually arrested. But Charles claimed that his then brother-in-law made sure to take the fall and actually kept all the articles about the arrest as a souvenir. Now living in California in the early 1960s, Carmichael owned a newspaper and used the printing presses to print counterfeit bills.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I know, I'm just loading it on here. I'm loading it on. There's not a lot of commendable things at this point. So
No, but keep going.
On August 4th, 1961, he was taken into custody, charged with conspiracy and possession of counterfeit currency. That is when Carmichael fled before the arraignment and evaded arrest and jail time.
Wow.
So again, now he's with Vivian.
Okay.
They're
deserted 2 wives, 4 kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's true.
Okay.
So while living on the run, he and Vivian grew their family to 7.
Oh, gee. Wait a minute. You're telling me they had 5 more children?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're now up to, my math isn't great, with 9.
We're not going to spend too much time thinking about all of that.
Okay. I'm keeping an open mind. I'm trying. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Of course, they could never live anywhere for longer than a few months, and they all changed their identities using stolen records. They homeschooled their 5 kids, and the family bounced from state to state for years for fear of being caught, of course. And by the early 1960s, the FBI had built up extensive files on Carmichael for all these various cons that then he had implemented throughout his then life, which included, again, everything from selling vacuum cleaners, knitting machines, as the counterfeiting scheme we talked about, embezzling down payments from customers. So Candy Michael, one of Liz and Vivian's 5 children, recalled that growing up, they rarely stayed in the same place longer than 2 months on account of the fear that Carmichael would be discovered by the authorities. I know, April, I know what you're thinking right now. Why is Missy presenting this crook as a Sheela? And you're right. She was a crook. She was a deserter, but she was also so much more. And I'm getting to that. I am getting to that.
Go for it.
So please be patient with me.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. In the late 1960s, the then Michael informed Vivian that he was actually Liz and that he wanted to pursue his life as a trans woman, but he wanted Vivian to remain by his side.
Okay.
And apparently they had a very good relationship. Apparently they were very much in love.
Well, 5 kids later.
So an upset Vivian left town with 2 of their children, and in a letter attempting to explain what she was going through, Liz wrote to Vivian, "I'm not a man anymore, at least not in the sexual sense, if I ever was." Ultimately, it was a love letter stating, "I would walk through fire for you and the kids." So after a short time, Vivian returned home.
Oh, that's interesting. So this was before transgender surgery, or?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
She had always felt this. This is not something that just, happened overnight, but she had always realized she was a woman, but did not live as a woman. And finally, she was to a point in her life where she wanted to live authentically. And so she told Vivian, and of course it was a really hard thing because she loved Vivian. They had a wonderful relationship. In fact, we'll get to that, but her kids loved her so much, and her wife loved her so much. She was so loved by her family. She was such a good mother and such a good family.
To the last 5.
Right, yeah.
Well, we won't talk about that.
Jeez, April. Okay. So again, Vivian returns home.
Yeah.
And after living that, ragged life of a fugitive for several years, constantly moving her family around the country and trying to eke out an existence using all kinds of fake identities, Elizabeth Carmichael decided to stop running and, as reported by the New York Post, decided to fake her own death. to get a fresh start.
Oh, interesting. That is interesting. Okay, I'm intrigued.
So by faking the death of Jerry Dean Carmichael, Elizabeth Carmichael was able to finally live life totally on her own terms, authentically as a transgender woman.
Well, that was quite cunning of her, because who would be looking for a female?
You know, and this is what everybody says, of course.
Right.
This is where people go.
Yes, and you're going to defend her authenticity as a woman, which I'm not necessarily
I am going to, yes.
disputing, but
It seems,
I
know it seems convenient.
Yeah.
It seems convenient. I get that, but that's not something that is easily decided.
Agreed.
That is the essence of.
Oh yeah, I'll get myself out of trouble by changing my gender. Sure. Yeah, I get that. It would not be a cavalier decision.
No.
Okay.
No. So it was a difficult and slow process to obtain hormones, and surgery required to transition in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I mean, it's hard enough now. Think about in the 60s and 70s. So Liz was self-administering hormone injections that she procured from veterinarians.
Wow.
And then she also traveled to Mexico for breast implant surgery in 1969. And she was really hoping one day to get vaginoplasty. That was kind of like in the cards for the future. She was hoping. So she didn't do it all at once, but just was kind of slowly transitioning on her own the best she could. And Liz and Vivian's kids were acclimated to the idea of Liz too. The first part of the transition was just calling their dad Jerry. And then daughter Candy said over about 3 years, Carmichael became Aunt Jerry, and then Aunt Liz, and then just her mother. And Carmichael also taught herself to speak in a more womanly fashion by listening to and imitating tape recordings. So that's, her daughter's quoted as saying that she would hear her mother kind of rehearsing her voice. And there's this amazing HBO series called Lady in the Dale. It was made in 2021. And to quote co-director Zachary Druckers, she said that I think a lot of people go through, oh, come on, Liz became trans at 45. But Liz was always trans. Again, she was just operating with the tools that were available to her. And this was a slow transition, obviously. And she transitioned the best she could with the tools she had later in life, yes. And she messed up in a lot of ways, but the reality of the messiness of trying to figure out yourself in a world that doesn't have a place for you is I think, a very valid point.
So are you maybe suggesting that her earlier crimes and lack of responsibility with her families and all that stuff was tied to a lack of authenticity within herself?
Yes. I mean, that in itself is a struggle. It's quite
So did
possible.
she stop doing the swindling? And
Well, April, you're getting ahead again. Always gets ahead, doesn't she?
I'll be patient.
Yes.
Keep going.
Yes. Well, we're getting there.
Yeah.
So, as noted by Esquire magazine, when she reemerged officially under her new name identity as Elizabeth in 1974, she came prepared with a new backstory.
Well, she's good at backstories, I'll
Right.
tell you that.
That's right. So, she claimed to have studied structural engineering at Ohio State University and invented a deceased husband named Jim, who was also a structural engineer. And she would often introduce her wife, Vivian, as her secretary or sometimes her sister-in-law.
Oh, because they couldn't live openly as a lesbian couple or same-gender couple.
Right.
In that era. That makes sense.
Right.
And her wife went along with that.
Yeah. Yeah, her wife was very committed.
I would say so.
They were both very committed to each other.
Okay.
So Carmichael had been obsessed with cars her whole life. And she continued to be dead set on one day building a car that would take down Detroit. She now wanted to be the first woman to disrupt the auto industry. That was her goal. And so, according to The Guardian, Carmichael was a dogged entrepreneur, a consummate scammer, a bombastic businesswoman, and had become a gripping conversationalist, the type of personality who could charm anyone within 5 minutes. Sounds familiar, right? She was extremely charming, but she was also a transgender woman at a point in history that was not at all friendly to the trans community.
That I could understand.
So as a result, she faced some pretty bleak prospects in terms of employment. And she continued to be a gripping entrepreneur, at least in spirit. And she persevered, and she ended up landing a job with the United States Marketing Institute of California. And that was a company that provided advice and guidance to inventors, hoping to help them market their ideas, basically.
Oh, interesting.
So, as reported by Esquire magazine, and again, that's where she met the man who would alter the course of her life, a man named Dale Clift. And the two became fast friends. They bonded over their love for cars, and Cliff introduced Carmichael to his prototype for a three-wheeled vehicle that he had designed out of motorcycle parts. And Cliff called the contraption a commuter cycle. And he thought of it as kind of a dune buggy, having potential as a dune buggy. It was lightweight. It was an affordable kind of recreational vehicle. So Carmichael, though, saw way more potential in this design. That aha moment just kind of seized her. And she also thought, wait a second, there was this huge energy crisis going on in the 70s.
Yeah.
You might remember.
Very much so.
You know what I always remember? I remember that we had this old station wagon, and one morning we got up, and there was like pieces of hose like next to the station wagon, and somebody had
Tried to
siphon our gas out, like that, sucking through the. Can you imagine?
People were desperate.
And we had no gas in our car.
The lines to get
weird.
gas.
We lived in kind of a nice neighborhood outside of Detroit. It was and I remember just being so perplexed. It's like, what did they do? How did they do that? Did they drink the gas? I was so confused.
Wow. Yeah. But that was very significant.
It was. It was huge. So again, this is also something that she saw as a potential solution to this energy crisis. And, this was just gripping the country in the 1970s. And here was this cheap car that could offer excellent gas mileage with a finished design ready to go.
So it was a novel idea.
Yeah, pretty exciting.
Okay.
So Carmichael, telling Lyft that he could potentially earn $3 million in royalties, worked out a deal with him, licensing the rights to his design and naming the car the Dale in his honor. Does that ring a bell? The Dale?
The Dale? I can't say it does.
Okay.
But then again, I'm not a Detroit car gal.
Okay. Well, I knew nothing of this story, and I'm from Detroit. And okay, so when Clift agreed, Carmichael opened what she called the 20th Century Motor Car Company in hopes of manufacturing the Dale. This was it.
Okay.
And by the way, kind of interestingly enough, the 20th Century Motor Car Corporation was named after a fictitious business and author Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged, for you Ayn Rand fans. So a little side note, of course, Carmichael was a huge fan, which makes perfect sense. Of course, Rand was known for objectivism based on the idea that people should pursue their happiness using reason as their guide, but living for themselves. No such thing as altruism or self-sacrifice. Those things were considered very destructive. So again, this is very in line with Liz Carmichael's thinking. Yeah. And
maybe gives you some insight, too, into some of the more sinister things that she did.
Sinister, okay. Yeah, true. Maybe, perhaps.
Maybe.
It's a way, It's a way of viewing the world, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So again, for all you Ayn Rand fans, you get it. So to Carmichael, the Dale was a vehicle to escape poverty and to escape her past. To quote her, at 21, I would have been satisfied with millions, but now I want billions, she said. This car's going to make me more green than you can see in Vermont on a clear day. She was ready to go, yeah. And then she said, we're going to shock General Motors, Ford, and the rest of them right out of their big overstuffed seats. So her audacious plan was to market this cheap, futuristic-looking, fuel-efficient, three-wheeled car, the Dale.
Okay.
So again, Carmichael had been claiming that her background was in engineering, so she stuck with that. And she kind of threw in, her earlier story too, that she had grown up repairing tractors as a tomboy farm girl, and that she was now a widow with 5 children whose husband had worked for NASA. She also described herself as having an MBA, an engineering degree, and experienced in working for a Florida-based family business, the Carmichael Research and Development Company that built custom cars.
You know, if you're going to have to manufacture a backstory, why not go all in?
Exactly.
You know, I just...
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
PhD, doctorate.
Bring it.
Maybe she worked for NASA too.
Yeah.
She was the first person on the moon before they went there.
You know,
okay.
A little side note to this is that I think it's hilarious when I think about us now. When people say things, we can look them up.
Right, of course.
People can't lie the way they used to. You know what I mean? They'd be found out.
Even back then, there are ways to check her degree and some of the claims she made.
But, you know, it's
no record of this. Well, I guess if she gave her husband her own former name, I guess that person did exist. But he wasn't with NASA. Okay, anyway, I digress.
Yeah, you do.
What am I doing?
So what really set the Dale apart was Carmichael's showmanship and her public relation prowess. And it just had everybody just kind of wondering. You know, everybody, this was exciting. This was an exciting time.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Did she present as a feminine woman, or did she look like a guy in drag? Or did you come across any of that?
I mean, that's really perspective, I guess. I mean, I really saw her as a woman. I did. I can see, I mean, she was 6 feet tall and weighed 250 pounds.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm trying to figure out what part of her identity, and you know, I don't mean to judge it, I'm just trying to understand it.
She had breasts, and the way she spoke, she was such a woman.
Okay.
I mean, really, and an inspiring woman in a lot of ways. But again, this is a complicated, layered story where we have to kind of set different aspects aside.
I'll go with that.
Okay, so we're going to just keep moving
going.
here.
Yeah.
So from her perch as the president of the 20th Century Motor Car Corporation in Encino, California, not too far from here,
Not far.
the 6-foot Carmichael became a magnet for media attention.
Interesting.
People were very, very intrigued by her. Very intrigued. And with the help of a team and a publicist, she went on a press blitz marketing junket, basically. And she talked about the vehicles being low priced, less than $2,000, which is about $13,000 today. At the time, the average new car price was roughly $4,700, which is kind of funny. Kind of funny.
Days.
So this was less than half the price, you know, of a new car. And also, you know, of course, that fuel efficient part of the car was a huge essential part. And she also talked about how safe it was. And Carmichael was extremely charismatic, as I said before. She made for a great interview, and she just made these grand proclamations. And she sat with interviews for Newsweek and People, telling the latter, they thought Henry Ford was crazy. I'll show them. I'm going to rule the auto industry like a queen. And you better believe that the freaking Big Three was intimidated by this woman.
Well, that's fun.
Come on. I
Okay.
mean, you got it.
I'm in.
I'm just saying that. I'm not even like that. I'm just...
It's an entertaining image, no doubt.
Yeah. Not only is this somebody who's come up with this, you know, fuel efficient, safe, inexpensive car, but she's a woman.
Right.
She's a freaking woman, like a woman powerhouse, you know? So I'm sure they were shaking in their boots. But going back to like how safe it was, she claimed that it was incredibly safe. And she promised all these safety features like impact resistant windows. She's described it as a body of rocket structural resin that won't dent or shatter. She claimed to have driven the Dale into a wall at 30 miles an hour with both car and driver coming out intact. But sometimes Carmichael's story just upped the speed a little bit. According to one 1975 newspaper article, she claimed it was 50 miles an hour, and she said that the car tore up, but they were able to climb out, blood running down her face, her body black with bruises from the safety belts. And then later reports would claim that, you know, she said she drove the car into the wall at 60 miles per hour with no ill effects for her or the car. So she definitely was a good storyteller.
Yeah, but doesn't keep her story straight.
Right. She was exaggerating a bit, let's say. Yeah. But what struck people most was that tri-wheel design. With 2 wheels in front, 1 in the back, the rear seemed to hover in midair. And Carmichael had claimed that losing that 4th wheel reduced the car's weight to a slim 1,000 pounds and shaved off $300 off that retail price. So despite a lack of road tests, Carmichael's grandiose promises attracted a number of investors and deposits.
Wow.
A deposit of about $500, which is about $3,000 today, could reserve you a Dale.
Wow.
And the brochure, which displayed this bright yellow Dale, exclaimed, "Dollar for dollar, the best car ever built." So people also began looking into opening Dale dealerships. So she started receiving payments of $35,000 to $75,000 for franchises, and claimed
on a car that hasn't been manufactured.
Yes, on a car that has not been manufactured. You better believe she was charismatic, right? And so, again, these are her franchises, and she claimed to have gotten more than $1 million for overseas rights, yet nothing was even being manufactured at that time at all. So she did purchase and plan for a 150,000 square foot plant in Burbank, California, but it just never seemed operational. Postal inspector who went to take a look at the time found it was vacant. And when Carmichael was pressed, she insisted that production would begin to ramp up by June of 1975. In 1974, a Dale prototype appeared at the Los Angeles Auto Show and also landed a spot on The Price is Right. Thanks to Liz.
Thanks to Liz. Liz knows how to...
You can watch the episode. It's pretty awesome.
I have to.
You have to, yeah. But had someone, of course, been awarded that vehicle, they would have been in for quite the surprise because that vehicle on display was a prototype, and I didn't have anything functioning in it. But that's how, inspirational and charismatic Carmichael was, that she just convinced the producers to include it. Why the heck not?
Why not?
So again, there was all this excitement. There was these big sales before the cars were ever manufactured. And in the fall of 1974, there started to be kind of a shift. The government kind of caught on to what was happening, and they sent a cease and desist order from the California Corporation Commission demanding that the 20th Century Motor Car Company stop selling their stock. And around the same time, Encino broadcast reporter Dick Carlson, the father of Fox newscaster Tucker Carlson, began investigating the legal issues facing Carmichael and her motor company, and also began to investigate her backstory a little bit. And it's then that Carlson realized that she was transgender, and he outed Carmichael on air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I know. I love how Filmmaker magazine put this. They said Carmichael's over-the-top boast and publicity stunts edged her ever closer to breaking the glass ceiling and upending Detroit. A few corporate-friendly straight white guys began to sniff around. Most notably, an equally egotistical local news reporter by the name of Dick Carlson. Yes, he who spawned that other pompous journo. In short order, the story of an overhyped sports car became a focus on Liz Carmichael herself, which inevitably transformed into the tale of her former existence as Jerry Dean Michael. Things continued to heat up with the California authorities. So in January of 1975, Carmichael simply moved the business to Dallas and renamed the Dale the Revette.
Can't make this up. At least
Liz! Liz! She claimed that she would build a $1 million research lab and that there would be 88,000 cars by the end of 1975. That was the plan. But this relocation and rebranding didn't stop ongoing investigators. And around that same year, 1975, was February of 75, so pretty shortly thereafter, locating to Dallas, 5 of the company's officials were arrested. Now, backpedaling a little bit here, the people that worked for Liz loved Liz. I mean, they talked so highly of her. They were so inspired by her. She paid everybody. If you worked for Liz, you were treated like family. I mean, people had, if you watch Lady in the Dale or you read about her, people loved her. There was nobody saying that she screwed them over other than...
Well, the government.
Yeah.
Who's counting?
Oh, the man. It's the man. So...
She didn't make a car. But anyway, keep going.
We're going to discuss all of this.
Okay.
But, so again, in February 75, 5 of the company officials were arrested, and it's then that, Carmichael kind of caught wind of what was going on. She fled her home just a few minutes before her home was raided.
Oh my gosh.
And she left behind wigs, padded bras, and of course this all confirmed Dick Carlson's claims. And this led authorities discovering that Carmichael was indeed a transgender woman who originally had been known as Jerry Dean Michael, who was wanted on counterfeiting charges from 1961. Remember that?
Yes, federal crime.
Yeah. And so the fact that Carmichael was a trans woman became the central focus of the media at this time.
Of course.
Yeah. It was the story on everyone's lips, apparently. So the media attention turned from interest in the car to prodding and skepticism about Carmichael's sex. When a reporter during the trial told Carmichael that people were interested in her personal life, Carmichael answered, "Whatever claim to fame I have is that of a producer of automobiles, not as a sex change artist." True, yeah. So in April 75, Carmichael was finally found and arrested in Miami as she attempted to escape yet once again.
Oh, wow.
And this time she tried to escape by climbing out a window. And she was sent to California to face charges of grand theft, corporate securities fraud, and conspiracy. And at her trial, she opted to represent herself.
Of course she did. I'm going to write this story. Maybe I do have the right imagination.
I have to say, though, she was a brilliant woman, and she did her research, and she represented herself quite well. I'm going to say that. She would declare that she was a pioneer who had struck out at overbearing car companies, basically alluding to the fact that her legal difficulties stem from the fact that we had the audacity to challenge Detroit, which I think does have some credence to it. I do.
If she had created the car, then it would have had a lot more credibility.
But
what I think you described is
we're talking about a timeline issue here.
Yeah. Yes.
We're talking about a timeline issue, which, again, we're going to get to.
Okay. I'll hold off. Okay.
So the Dale, per Carmichael, as well as many, many people who knew her and worked for her, the engineers who worked for her, said that it was absolutely legitimate and it would have succeeded had the business
been built.
had the business just been run in a different way, perhaps like
to make the car.
Okay. But of course, the prosecution got their automotive engineer, and he described the Dale as literally being held together with baling wire and coat hangers. And the jury deliberated for 16 lengthy days. And in 1977, Carmichael was found guilty on 26 counts.
Wow.
Her customers and investors had been defrauded of an estimated $1 to $3 million.
Wow.
By the way, shortly after Carmichael's trial, her wife Vivian did file for divorce. But they maintained a friendship throughout their lives. But after Carmichael's arrest, Vivian was one of the ones who really stuck up for Liz, maintaining that her intentions were genuine. They were always genuine. And it was just never having enough money to really start the business correctly. And she said that car was legitimate, though. That car was real, and it could have been brought to fruition. Not just Vivian. Many of the engineers she worked with, many people who have revisited that car, since then, have all said this.
The concept was viable. Yeah. And it was developed by, what was his name? By Dale.
Yeah, Cliff Dale.
Cliff Dale. And he was somebody who really did have some kind of engineering training or something.
Not necessarily. He was an inventor.
He was an inventor. Okay.
Yeah, he was an inventor. Vivian remarried pretty shortly thereafter leaving Liz, but it was short-lived due to an early death from cancer.
Oh.
That's what's sad, because I really admire Vivian in a lot of ways.
She can buy her gal.
She did. And,
well, she'd certainly had to overcome a lot of non-conventions.
Oh, yeah.
To raise her children and stick by.
And moving around constantly.
Yeah, right.
never being able to stay in the same place, having to change your identity
Couldn't
over
have
and
been
over.
easy, that's for sure.
Homeschooling your children. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So I give a lot of credit to Vivian, in addition to Liz, for the parents that they were, despite their lifestyle, being on the run as they were. So, yeah. In 1977, Carmichael was sentenced up to 20 years in California men's prison and fined $30,000.
Wow. And what about her hormone replacement?
Well, this is what sucks. Well, okay. So this is what's really interesting. Despite the fact that Carmichael's gender was unrelated to her criminal activities, she found, of course, the two relentlessly intertwined.
Right.
But she asked the court to acknowledge her as a woman during her trial, yet when she was found guilty, she was still sent to a men's prison. But what's interesting here, and I'm going to say this, that trans women before Liz had tried to assert their identities and were denied. So it was very groundbreaking that the judge really did acknowledge her identity and also made it required that she was referred to by her she, her pronouns in court.
Yeah.
So this was groundbreaking in itself.
Yeah.
But she had never fully transitioned. So that was their sticking point.
Okay.
Which is fucking ridiculous. That she was going to be sent to men's prison.
Wow. Which
you can think about what that fucking means, right?
Yeah, that would be bad. That would definitely be horrible.
Right. Sure. After being found guilty, Carmichael spent 18 months in a men's prison before being paroled on bail.
Okay, so it wasn't a terribly long sentence.
Well,
long enough, I'm sure.
Long enough
that
she was beaten mercilessly, and that is no surprise. Can you imagine?
Well, no. I mean, she would be fair game for anybody, to just vent whatever on. Yeah.
I mean, it's so horrible because they just had denied her rights as a human being. I mean, it's just astounding to me. So then she was out on bail, and that's when she decided to skip town again.
She was tenacious.
Can you fucking blame her?
Well, no.
After being beaten?
Well, yes and no, but anyway, that's besides the point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on. She skipped town, right? She skipped going back to the fucking clink.
Okay. I'm not as sympathetic to her as you are. I mean, I think as a trans woman, it would be horrible, and I feel, I can't help but feel empathy for her having to go to a men's prison.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine the abuse she took. I'm sure it was, I don't even want to think about it. Horrifying. But she wasn't an innocent person. The things that she was found guilty about were actions that she perpetrated. And she did them repeatedly. She swindled people out of investments that she knew, even if the car was a great car.
But you know what I believe?
What?
And again, maybe I'm being altruistic.
Maybe, but
maybe I'm being... I honestly believe that she probably had every intention of the car succeeding.
It doesn't matter.
Paying everybody back.
No, Missy, it doesn't work like that.
But... Okay, I know that Mike mentioned this, and it's true. I bring this up. I had a store, and...
Nope, I know where you're going,
well,
and
this
it's
is
not the same thing.
My husband kind of suggested this to me.
Yeah.
And he said, I think you have a lot of sympathy for her because you were a failed entrepreneur. You were a failed businesswoman. And I will say that, I had a store. I led with my heart. I did not lead with my head.
Let me
made some very poor business decisions.
You did.
But you know what? At the root of it all, I had very good intentions.
No, it was more than good intentions.
But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, unfortunately.
Missy, yes. You had more than good intentions. You had products in your store that people bought, and they left, they gave you money, and they walked out with something.
I know.
There's a difference.
But I
hear what you're saying.
And this isn't a long twisted tale that I'm not going to get into, but at the end of the day, I had every intention of making good on things, and I did in the end.
And you did.
Yes.
You did. You didn't skip town. You didn't jump out windows. You didn't relocate. In fact, when you were...
But I wasn't a trans woman either.
That has nothing to do with it. You could be trans. You could be cis. It's not, has nothing to do with being trans.
Okay.
This has everything to do with honoring your commitments, which this person didn't do before she became trans. She started
This is really
as a man.
controversial. This is
Yeah.
a very controversial
Yeah.
episode. We want you to weigh in on this.
Yeah.
I am not excusing the things that she did in her life. Again, but sometimes we need to separate, we can separate the extraordinary from the decisions, the poor decisions made by the extraordinary.
This was more than poor decisions. They were intentional, criminal acts.
I don't think they were all intentional and criminal.
If you are taking money for a car you haven't built and people think they're getting the car and you don't even have a factory to make the car, that's intentional.
Well, I don't know. I'm just going to say.
I guess you're entitled to your view, and I hear the sympathy, and I can understand even the relating, and I certainly admired her charisma and showmanship and vision and her.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think
You see what I'm getting at here? I'm trying.
Yes.
I'm trying to create a bigger barrier.
Oh my gosh.
Between Liz, the pioneering, amazing trans woman,
And
entrepreneur
the liar.
that she was, and maybe the. Go ahead. You be on the other side of the bigger barrier.
Swindler, lying, cheating person who never really took responsibility.
Can we talk
for her
about what an
actions.
amazing mother she was?
To 5 out of 9 children. What about the other 4?
Oh my gosh.
She abandoned them.
Okay.
Never looked back.
Oh, we very often hear about entrepreneurs today. We do, who overpromise on their products that have not been created.
This is not.
We do hear about this.
We do, and people are like that. And you know what? When you made poor business decisions, you paid the price. You paid the piper. You were accountable. She didn't. And while I don't blame her for running away, not wanting to deal with the penal system any more than she already had,
Yeah.
I definitely feel sympathetic to that. I definitely feel for what it is to be a trans person in an era. I mean, it's hard to be a trans person now. Any earlier than now must have been so difficult, and I feel for that. But still, the woman she wasn't brave. She was a liar, a cheat, and a swindler.
She was still, I'm on the other side of the bigger barrier.
Okay.
And on my side of the bigger barrier, she was brave.
And you get to be there.
She was brave.
Wow, we never had an on-air argument
We
before. I
haven't.
love
We
it.
haven't. We know. This is good. And controversy is good. It's good.
So anyway, what else
And I'm
happened?
not seeing this as black and white either.
No, and I don't either. I really
Okay,
don't.
I'm glad. Because this is not black or white.
I definitely
There's a
see
lot of gray
qualities.
area.
Yeah,
There's a
I
lot
see
of gray
qualities.
area in this. So,
Okay.
And I think I got ahead of myself a little bit. So I just want to say that, she was out on bail because in 1980, it was like she was allowed to be out on bail. There was an appeals process going on while the whole thing made its way through the judicial system. And during that time, she set up a roadside flower vending operation in Los Angeles with her children.
With their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And by the way, like her kids really stuck by her side. So when she and Vivian separated, they really kind of wanted to be with her.
Okay.
She was, they all really
Selling
loved
flowers
and
at the
admired her.
roadside.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. With a backstory.
But when
We're
it became,
homeless.
after, she had been on, she had been on bail or whatever, it just became more and more clear that prison was going to be inevitable. And that's when she actually skipped bail and became a fugitive.
Okay.
So,
well, I could understand that.
yeah. So,
Yes.
now we're going to jump ahead a little bit. It would be 9 years before Liz would be returned to custody in 1989.
Wow.
So Carmichael's downfall came as the result of a 1989 appearance on Unsolved Mysteries. And that's how my friend Jory kind of brought this to my attention, because Jory and I are both kind of crime buffs.
Yeah.
And that's how she found out about Liz Carmichael, through unsolved mysteries.
Interesting.
It tasks viewers, of course, with providing tips. That was the big thing. I don't know if you ever watched it. It's actually, they re-released it. They have it on the air again now. I don't think they've made any episodes lately, but you better believe I've watched all of them. But, the idea is that you get the audience involved to, have you seen this person? Providing tips if they knew anything about unresolved cases that are featured on the show. So within just moments of the broadcast, someone phoned in to say that they recognized Carmichael as a flower vendor named Catherine Elizabeth Johnson in Dale, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Dale, Texas, of all places. Yeah. So, Superior Court Judge David Horowitz ordered then Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael, age 60, to immediately begin serving a 1 to 10 year sentence for conspiracy, grand theft, and stock fraud, once again in a men's prison.
Bummer.
Unfucking believable.
Well, I'm going to say bummer, and you're going to say unfucking believable.
Well, no, okay, at least concede to that, because she was a woman, she was living as a woman, that was her authentic self. Should she have been put in a men's prison, April?
No. And she should have been protected because she was really fair game to go into a men's prison. I believe that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
These are her constitutional rights. She was living as a woman.
Okay.
So please agree with me.
I didn't disagree with you. I agree.
When you said bummer, I said unbelievable. You were like, I say bummer. You say unbelievable. No, that is the essence of degradation and taking the rights away from a human being. That is horrifying. Okay, sorry. Okay. So Liz ended up serving 2.5 years. She had good behavior. And she went back to her flower business. It's interesting because there's not a ton of information about her flower business, but if you watch Lady in the Dale, there's a lot more information. And apparently a lot of her story was kind of buried. A lot. It was buried. And when they did Lady in the Dale, a lot of this information kind of came to the surface. Basically, she was always an entrepreneur. She was an entrepreneur. So she created this flower business, and it was really successful. And she had her children working for her, and they started recruiting people to come work for them. And they started recruiting people throughout Texas. She ended up going to Austin, but they were going to, Dallas, different cities, and they were recruiting people. And they basically were finding people who were homeless and didn't really have anything. And they would say, hey, come to Austin, come work for us. We will give you 3 meals a day. We'll give you a place to live. We'll give you fair wages.
Great.
And they got all these people on their feet.
Yeah, that's great.
They interview, in particular, this one man in Lady in the Dale who was a former soldier, and he had terrible post-traumatic stress, and he was very depressed, and he was homeless and really just kind of spiraling. And he said that, thanks to Liz and her flower organization, that saved his life, essentially. And he said everybody she took in, she treated like a family member. You felt like you were part of something. You were part of a family. And her granddaughter actually gets introduced, one of her granddaughters gets introduced in Lady in the Dale as well, who also went to kind of work for the company. And she said it was such a wonderful way to grow up amongst all these interesting people, telling stories, having these big, huge family dinners. She said it was wonderful. Like, she loved her childhood. Okay. It's all very interesting, but she got in a little trouble.
Yeah.
So essentially, this guy comes to town. He's a reporter, and he starts seeing everywhere he goes. He sees these flower vendors. And he was like, what's going on? And one day he asks somebody, and they say, oh, yeah, I work for Catherine Elizabeth Johnson. She went back to that name. She just continued to try to use that name. After she didn't go back to Liz Carmichael. And he realizes, who is this person? She's got quite the monopoly on the flower business. So, of course, he kind of goes to uncover her story and realizes that, she just has this business completely off the grid. Not paying taxes, paying everybody under the table, not legitimate. But again, everybody who worked for her loved her. She treated everybody fabulously, like a member of the family. So there's something to be said for that, I'm going to say. She died at 77. She died from cancer. She spent, her latter years with her family. And it's interesting because, again, that's something that I uncovered. They say she died in 2004 again of cancer, or did she? Appropriately, for someone who gave authorities the slip several times and lived under many assumed names, there's not a lot of certainty about her fate. Because Time magazine reports that there has been no proof of a death certificate or even a birth certificate for that matter for her. And some reports, as late as 2013, had claimed that she was still well and alive in Austin, Texas. But probably by now, we can assume she's passed away.
Yes.
But in 2013, they were still saying, maybe not. She was like, when everybody thought Elvis was still living.
Right.
What's certain, of course, is that, Liz Carmichael is one of the most complex criminal figures in U.S. history. That lingering confusion about her final years and her death is 100% on brand for Liz. I know that there's a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions here, a lot of controversy here. I just want to reiterate that I think she was amazing in her vision and not afraid to be who she was in a time that was just so... I think she was very brave. I think she was very brave to endure the way she did and not back down from who she was in any way. Of course, the car never materialized and her methodology wasn't legal. Her ambition was certainly palpable. But the two most important things about her, she once had said, which I think is kind of funny, is that she has endless energy. I think I can relate to that.
I can agree.
And I am totally 100% honest.
Okay.
So the latter, I don't know. But she does pose the question to me of what her life might have been like if she had been born a couple decades later at a time when the public was maybe a little more understanding about what it means to be trans. Maybe she had, made better decisions, had gotten better people to be part of her circle. This could have been a different story, I do believe. And in that HBO series, Lady in the Dale, they interviewed, again, those engineers who worked with her. Mm-hmm. And they all suggest that it could have been revolutionary if they had just had the more time to develop and create it, they say. But the marketing got way ahead of the production, and Carmichael oversold what she had. That's the bottom line. Yes, she was a convicted fraudster, it's true. However, some still say that her story was never told fairly or accurately during her lifetime. According to Esquire, the claims she made about the Dale weren't lies. The car could have met those standards in the time. But Carmichael was impatient. So she could have just held off on selling that stock and going through those proper, legalities. The Dale could have very well succeeded. And again, I do think there's something to be said for the big three being intimidated at the time. I'm sure they had a lot to do with her being torn down as well. And the story behind the Dale is also, of course, the story of her transgender identity, which was constantly used against her as a method of perpetual fraud. And I do not believe that she was a fraud in that sense. I believe she was true to herself, who she was. She was living her authentic life as a woman, and Liz Carmichael, as far as I'm concerned, was a woman. But her identity as Liz, as a woman in the court, was a huge leap of progress, obviously. So she stood up for herself. And again, I go back to that. They were willing to acknowledge the fact that she was a woman in court. She was referred to as she and her, which was so important at that time. And I just think that, still today, like trans people have to... It's got to be very hard even today to be trans, right? And you have to claw. You're clawing your way out of this difficult world and trying to find a space for yourself. I'm going to quote Filmmaker magazine, which I talked about earlier, and they suggest here that being trans was really as much of a crime as being a criminal in her case.
Yeah, I would agree.
And she never conceded a day in her life. She woke up every day making the choice to be Liz Carmichael, despite knowing what she would face. And that's more courage than most people in this world have. according to Filmmaker magazine. The biggest revelation is survival. It's heroism. And I want to acknowledge that. And I know, this is hard. I believe she got in way over her head. And I'm going to go back to Helen Duncan for a minute, the medium. Mm-hmm. Helen Duncan, I believe, we talked about this, we both believe, she was a gifted medium.
Yeah, right.
But things got away from her, right? She had to compete. She had to compete with this market of other mediums at the time. And so, she started bringing in the ectoplasm and weird spirits.
It went into bad marketing. But I want to come back.
Do you want to put a pin in it, April? April likes to put a pin in things. I don't know if you ever noticed that.
Yeah, I do. Let's put a pin in that.
Yeah. Okay. So Sheila's stories, just in general, they're complicated. They're complicated stories. They're often controversial stories. And they're going to continue to throw us, curveballs. This is a curveball, certainly. And this is not black and white. This is not a black and white situation. But I am just asking you to look at it through the lens, again, of this pioneering transgender woman. Her daughter, Candy, was quoted as saying, "We might have had a really strange family, but we were such a tight-knit family." She and her siblings remember their upbringing as chaotic but adventurous. Oh, I love this. At one point, they said that Jerry decided that he wanted to own a pet store, and the house ran wild with creatures. Candy says Jerry couldn't do anything on a small basis. But again, Carmichael had a wonderful relationship with her children, her grandchildren. She was a loved and cherished parent. She was loved and cherished by the people that worked with her, the people who worked for her. Carmichael's daughter, again, stating that having her father as her mother was a wonderful thing. The transition was efficient for the entire family, and they were able to stay united. And that although the children were aware of Carmichael's elaborate schemes, that they all believed in her, and they all recognized, she had some futuristic ideas, and they recognized those, and they realized, but unfortunately, she did kind of walk that path of crime. And despite their difficult upbringing, though, again, and running from the law, she was incredibly affable matriarch. Really, watch Lady in the Dale. Look up some beautiful pictures of her with her kids and her family. With her and Vivian and the kids.
Yeah.
Again, I know I'm kind of reiterating here over and over, but I just want to suggest there can be room for complex and flawed people with good intentions that go awry. And I feel like there's a lot to be said here for trans misrepresentation that needs to be corrected. It's not just a story about a criminal, but it's a story about a very brave, visionary trans trailblazer.
Well, I do have to say I agree that she was a trailblazer, that she has a remarkable story. I'm glad you told it. I think it was really interesting. I'm glad you shared it. I don't think I feel as enamored because I think there's a separation between her challenges as a trans woman and the family she built with Vivian and the children. I think that was really amazing. And her talents were clearly vast and impactful, and she was a force to be reckoned with. And at the same time, she was a criminal. She lied and cheated, and
there's room for complex and flawed people.
Yeah, and for that reason, I'm a little less enamored with her than you are. But I do thank you for bringing the story in. I think this is an interesting Sheela.
Thank you. Thank you,
and a complicated Sheela.
Thank you.
There's no rule that says that any of us all have to agree. About exactly, because I'm not lining up, to loud her. But it was really fun and interesting. I definitely want to watch the HBO.
Lady in the Dale. Yeah. And let me just give a little shout out to Drucker, who is the co-writer and director of Lady in the Dale. She's an amazing trans woman. Herself. I want to quote her. She says, "I hope Liz will catalyze a new era of telling more complicated stories about trans people who did make mistakes and were flawed, and yet were still mothers, sisters, and humans, and still adored and loved by many."
Yeah.
Her name is Zachary Drucker, by the way. And I also want to point out that there are still 3 prototypes of the Dale that survived.
Wow.
And one is at the Peterson Museum.
No kidding, in Los Angeles.
Yeah. April and I are going to go there on a field trip.
Yep.
We're going to post some pictures on Instagram and our website for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they say one is in private hands, and there's one in a museum also in Lincoln, Nebraska. And we definitely have to go. Last shout out again to Zachary Drucker. She's you got to check her out in her own right. She's a really amazing producer, and she actually starred in the Netflix documentary called Disclosure, which is a really interesting documentary about the history of Hollywood's trans people. So that's next on my list for sure. So thank you again. We want to know what you think.
Yes,
this
please.
has been a controversial time.
Definitely.
We are on two sides of the bicker barrier.
Not so much.
Yeah.
But
Are we going to be friends after this?
Of course.
I think we need a cocktail or something. I think we need to do a shot. I don't know. It could come to fisticuffs. All right.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
We love
for
you
joining
guys.
us.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Bye.
Sheela,